Well, what we're going to do today is we're going to finish our unit on imperialism. What we're going to talk about is kind of the legacy of imperialism. But by legacy, I mean, what does this all mean? What does imperialism mean? How should we look at imperialism? What were the effects of imperialism? All of these things. So, let's jump into our essential question 17.5, and let's go right into the notes. And I'll try not to make this one last a very long time. Yeah, right. So, essential question 17.5, what is the legacy of imperialism? Pause if you need to. So, I want to talk about something kind of interesting that occurred in the 19th century and continues in some ways, and in some places, even to today. And that is how the nations of the world, the European nations of the world, displayed the power of their empire. And they did it through exhibitions and world fairs, okay? Now, I know I told you I'd talk about this about 2 chapters ago, but I've been putting it off because I think it fits in with what we are talking about right now. So let's go ahead and talk about the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. All right, now, one of the things that European nations and the United States do in this time period is they start having world fairs where they show off things from literally around the world. All right, and one of the very first ones was the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. And what it was intended to do was it was held to showcase, which means show off, the power of industry and the British Empire. Remember, the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain, and they, in this time period, are going to have this big fair where people from all around the world are going to show up, and they're going to look at examples of the power and the distance, and by distance I mean just like the size of the British Empire and all the things that it encompasses. All right, so one of the big things about the exhibition in London was the creation of the Crystal Palace. Here you see a photograph of it. But the Crystal Palace was basically a symbol of just the availability of modern natural resources like glass and iron. But this is where a large portion of the Great Exhibition in London was held, in this Crystal Palace. So, products from around India, here's a painting of the Crystal Palace. Products from around India and other places showed the might of the British Empire. So when you walked through this humongous structure, you could not help but being in awe of all the great, impressive technological wealth and power of the British Empire. You would walk through booths and you would see products from Asia, products from Africa, products from around the world that were under the control of the British Empire. Remember, the sun never sets on the British Empire, right? It's massive. So, the Great Exhibition in London was one of these early exhibitions where you could go and you could see things from around the world that you couldn't normally see. I mean, think about it. If you are a working class person from Great Britain, you're a factory worker, or you're a miner or whatever, if you go to the World's Fair, I mean, as a working class person, you're probably never going to get out and see the world, right? But if you go to the World's Fair, you can see exhibits from around the world. It's almost like today, you go to museums to see things that you can't normally see from around the world, right? Okay, so this kicked off a whole bunch of things. Sometimes they're called world exhibitions, sometimes they're called World's Fair, but basically they are held in huge cities all over the world. For instance, here's an advertisement for the one in Berlin, all right, the World's Fair in Berlin, which happened in 1896. So these were held throughout the 19th and 20th centuries to display the technology, display the goods, and display culture from around the world. They were very popular, and people from around the world ran to these to see them. And if you could afford to go to one, guys, and look at it, it was truly extraordinary. And yes, they even occurred in the United States. Here's one, guys, from Paris in 1889. Famous structures like the Eiffel Tower were actually built for the World Fair. I mean, think about the Eiffel Tower. It's made of steel, and what an accomplishment is, guys. And it shows the availability in steel and, like, the power of the French Empire, all right? World's fairs were in Chicago and other places. As a matter of fact, guys, check this out. If you didn't know it, guys, Disneyland, It's a Small World, was actually showcased at a World's Fair. That ride was actually at a World's Fair. Interesting, right? So, if you were go to these world fairs, like I said, you could see things from around the world. France obviously showed off their empire and their power. Germany showed off their empire and their power. The United States, when they hosted the world fairs, they showed off their power and their empire. So visiting the World's Fair inspired awe and curiosity in Westerners, all right? Now, another thing, guys, that the World's Fairs did, what they often showcased indigenous peoples from their empire. So indigenous peoples would be brought from Africa and Asia, and basically, in some cases, guys, there were villages created at the World's Fair that the indigenous people would pretend to live in, and very much they were put on display. Here's an example, guys, of people from Africa put on display at a World's Fair in St. Louis. Sometimes the indigenous people would put on shows where they would act like they were beheading another person to kind of show off, what Westerners would have been shocked as, pretty everyday occurrences in some tribal parts. Not really all the time, all right? But it's interesting because these people were kind of like performing, right? A lot of the African people and Asian people from the empires, they were very educated, and they were, because of missionary schools, they could speak English and whatever. And oftentimes, like I said, they would have to put on a show. Like, hey, this is kind of what Africa's like, even though in some cases the parts of Africa they were from weren't really like that anymore because of imperialism. So anyway, if you were a white Westerner, you could show up, you could see how people lived from around the world, you could show up and see things from around the world. Now you might be saying, isn't putting people on display kind of like putting humans in a zoo? And the answer is, absolutely, it was. So anyway, pause if you need to. We're moving on. All right, now, I want to move into kind of tools of imperialism, as your textbook calls it, and let's talk about some of the technology that allowed Europeans to conquer Africa and Asia and other parts of the world. So let's talk about the technology of the 19th century. First and foremost, let's talk about steamboats, all right? So, as you guys know, ships and nations with navies and powerful boats, ships, guys, have been able to conquer the world, all right? If you have a powerful navy like Great Britain or Spain before it, then you have the ability to get to places. Well, in the 1850s, this guy named Robert Fulton in the United States invents a steam-powered ship. And from there, as you can imagine, the ship of the day becomes the steam-powered ship. So, Europeans have a military advantage and military power over people that don't have steam power. Not only that, but a lot of ships are going to be made with metal hulls, which means it's really hard to destroy. Okay, especially if you're like China and you're trying to fight in the Opium Wars and you've got old wooden ships with sails and you're going up against a modern steam-powered British naval ship, you're gonna get annihilated, and it did happen. So, not only does this give Europeans military power and advantage, it also makes transportation of people a whole lot faster and transportation of goods a whole lot faster. So on one side, yes, there is definitely military use, but on the other side, you can cross vast distances and half the time of using sails, because think about it, if you are a sailing ship, you have to rely on the winds and the currents of the ocean, whereas if you're a steam-powered ship, you can go pretty much whenever and however you want, although they still kind of rely on ocean currents to get the most efficiency out of their travels. But anyway, it makes transportation of people and goods a whole lot faster. So steamboats are one of these tools of imperialism. But another one you might not think of is medicine. You see, one of the problems with Europeans in this time period is they at first only colonized the coasts of Africa and Asia, because if they got into the interior of Africa and Asia, a lot of Europeans would contract diseases like malaria. So one of the things, and a tool of imperialism, was they invented medicine, guys, to kind of make them immune to these diseases. And one of the most popular medicines was quinine. All right, now, quinine was a pill that allowed Europeans basically immunity to tropical diseases like malaria. But, guys, quinine became kind of a, Tylenol of its time as a cure-all medicine for a lot of people. I remember my grandfather drinking cocoa quinine, which is like quinine that tastes like chocolate, when he got sick. So anyway, I remember that growing up. My grandfather would eat something, and he'd be eating something for dinner, and it would taste terrible, and he would say, "Oh, that tastes like cocoa quinine." And I remember thinking, what the heck is this dude talking about? Well, that's what he was talking about. It tastes like medicine. But anyway, so quinine was one of these diseases, or not diseases, but one of these medicines that allowed Europeans to kind of conquer tropical diseases. And if you're immune to the diseases, guys, then you can go into the heart of Africa and not be affected. And as we know, they certainly did. So, here's another advertisement for quinine, a very universal drug. All right, what else? So yeah, like I said, Europeans not only use modern medicine, guys, to be able to help them be immune, guys, but they also spread modern medicine to eliminate deadly diseases around the world. Okay, we'll talk about that more a little bit later. All right, but anyway, one more big thing, of course, guns. All right. Now, guns have come a very, very, very long way since we first started talking about European history in class. All right. Most guns in the American Revolution and the Civil War were what are called muzzle loaders, where you have to load gunpowder into the barrel, and then you have to put a bullet down the barrel, and that takes time. But now you have new rifles, and you have modern bullets. Now, a bullet today, guys, you don't have to put gunpowder in a gun because the bullet itself has a little cap on the bullet that explodes because it has gunpowder in it, and it shoots the actual bullet out of the barrel. All right, think about that. That makes reloading a breeze. It makes guns a lot more efficient. But let me tell you something else that made guns a lot more efficient. The creation of machine guns, invented around the late 19th century. Here you see a picture of the Maxim machine gun. All right, a machine gun is you basically hold down the trigger, somebody feeds bullets through the machine, and it goes brrrr and mows people down. All right, now, think about it. Now, this is interesting, all right, because we'll talk about World War I in the next chapter. But here's the deal. Europeans, when they had machine guns, you might think, oh man, I'll bet they used those in battles like the, modern battles. But here's the deal, guys. They only really used machine guns against indigenous people because they thought using machine guns in a modern war against other Europeans kind of ungentlemanly warfare. So it's really interesting. When World War I breaks out, there was the assumption in a lot of places that machine guns were not going to be used. Yeah, right. Anyway, of course they get used and they mow people down, but we'll talk about that in the next chapter. All right? But like I said, the machine guns were kind of used to either put down native indigenous rebellions and imperialism, or at least fire off a few rounds and scare the crap out of native indigenous people. All right, so you put all these together along with a myriad of other, technology of the 19th century, telegraphs and telephones, then you see, guys, how Europeans were able to conquer such a vast amount of territory. Pause if you need to. All right, now, I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. I feel like this whole time in imperialism, maybe I've given you kind of an unbalanced view, guys, and I don't want to be unbalanced, all right? So far, all we've talked about is the horrible, awful, nasty, gruesome things that Europeans have done in this time period. And guys, I don't want to take away from that horrible, awful thing, things that Europeans have done, guys. But also, I want to kind of show you the other side, all right? Because as a teacher, guys, I try to be balanced, and it's kind of hard to be balanced about some things, all right? You're going to find when we talk about Nazism, I am not balanced about that, all right? But I mean, and it's hard to be balanced about imperialism, and I'm not trying to be balanced, okay? But I am trying to show you another side of imperialism, the other argument, okay? So, let's talk about the role and impact of missionaries, all right? Now, as you know, guys, as I've told you, Catholic missions have existed since the 15th century, all right? Catholics have been going all over the world, from Spain and Portugal, all over the world, guys, and even in France, and they've colonized, and they've brought in missions to the places that they've been, all right? The Spanish brought in missions in Latin America. The French brought in missions to Asia. Portugal brought in missions, throughout all of their colonies or territories, all right? So, now, it's Protestant churches that are the big thing in the 1800s that are spreading throughout the world, all right? So Protestant churches, Baptists, Methodists, all different groups of people, guys, are going to go around the world, and they're going to spread Christianity too, all right? So, European women are largely involved in these missionary societies. I mean, think about the ideas about women in the 19th century. A lot of Europeans believe that women are perfect for this because the stereotype is that women are nurturing, women can care for children, all of that stuff, right? So it's no shock that a lot of the missionaries were women going into the different parts of the world and helping with missionary efforts there. So, in the 19th century, something big happens. Christianity actually becomes a world religion. All right, now you think about it, you might think, well, wait, before this, wasn't Christianity a world religion? No, it was mostly a European religion, and Europeans spread that religion to the Americas. But largely Africa, largely the Middle East. The Middle East was largely Muslim. Africa was a mix between Muslim and also some Christianity, but mostly it was Islamic and like tribal religions. Asia was, Buddhist, Taoist, all manner of things. So Christianity hadn't really spread around the world, but now, because of imperialism, the religion of Christianity is going to become a world religion. All right, now, so look, how should we think about missions? Well, guys, like I said, I've told you about all the bad things that Europeans have done, but let's just for a second focus on some good things. And I want to kind of say to you, missionaries often had good intentions, all right? And they often accomplished good things. So some of us might look at missions like this picture, all right, where you have white Europeans and they're teaching. Look at the kid on the ground, guys, mixing the kids on the ground. You've got white children living and mixing with the African children, all right, living in harmony. And that's one view, guys, of missionaries. Missionaries often believed in equality. They believed a lot of ways that basically all people have a soul. All people are God's children, all right, if you're Christian. They believed that. So, like I said, guys, missionaries had good intentions a lot of times, and they often accomplished some good things. Let's talk about some of those good things, all right? So, modern science, all right? They brought modern science everywhere they went, okay? They brought the germ theory of disease. I mean, think about tribal people that did not know about germs, and they believed much in the way that Europeans believed, that all manner of things cause germs, even spirits. So imagine white Europeans teaching them about germ theory, teaching them about basic hygiene, how to keep clean, how to keep yourself from getting infected. Okay, modern medicine, a lot of European missionaries, guys, because of missionaries, a lot of native people all around the world are going to get cures for diseases that they didn't quite comprehend or understand. Also, missionaries are going to teach you guys remember the agricultural revolution that we talked about? They are going to teach tribal people from Africa and Asia modern farming techniques that they themselves had discovered in the 17th century. So all of these things are going to have a positive impact, in a way, on the peoples that they are colonizing. All right? So, another big thing is that missionaries and Europeans are going to help eliminate deadly diseases all over the world. One of the big things I used to talk about in AP US history that you'll learn about next year is I used to talk about Cuba. You see, when Americans, took over Cuba for a bit, they eventually gave them their own freedom and the right to rule themselves. But when they took over Cuba, one of the biggest diseases that killed a lot of people was yellow fever. So, basically, American scientists learned the cause of yellow fever. It was transmitted by mosquitoes. And mosquitoes liked to congregate and multiply around swamp areas. Basically, American scientists went in there and drained a lot of swamp areas, which eliminated the mosquitoes, which eliminated yellow fever. So, not just the United States, but even Europeans, guys, are going to go give these life-saving medicines to the people of the world. And that, guys, is a positive thing. All right? Another thing is they're going to educate indigenous people. All right? So, now, part of education, guys, is, yes, teaching them the language of English, which, yes, Europeans do unfortunately feel is superior to cultural languages. But I want you to think about this. All right, Europeans are going over, they're teaching them English, they're eliminating all kinds of, tribal languages. But one of the things that missionaries did was they had to learn the language of the people more than any Europeans, guys. Missionaries were there learning the language, learning the traditions and the culture of the people. All right, they needed to do this so they could translate the Bible into a language that the different peoples of the world could understand. So one of the reasons that tribal languages were preserved was because of missionaries learning these languages and preserving them. Now, you might say, well, you know what? If Europeans hadn't come over, then missionaries wouldn't have had to preserve these languages. And you're right there, too. All right? But anyway, I want to kind of just explain to you, though, that missionaries oftentimes did learn the customs and did learn the traditions and the languages of the indigenous people around the world. All right? Another thing that missionaries did was they worked to eliminate dangerous and deadly indigenous practices. Now, there's a stereotype, guys, of like tribal Africans, tribal Native Americans, tribal people from around the world, like engaging in cannibalism and headhunting and all that kind of things. But guys, that is truth. There were places in Africa that did engage in enslaving other tribes, in killing and cannibalizing. All right, in cutting off the heads of people, all manner of things, guys. And Europeans are going to bring some stability to these regions and kind of move away from these traditions, all right? And they're going to work to eliminate some of these traditions. I mean, you guys saw in India, they eliminated sati. And you might think, well, what about women that wanted to commit sati? Well, guys, I don't really know how many women really wanted to commit sati versus how many women were forced into it, guys. I do know there were examples of both. But they are going to eliminate some kind of deadly practices, all right? So that is good things that European missionaries are doing, all right? So one more thing before we move on, guys, is look, when things like the Belgian Congo happen, when massacres and murders of indigenous people happen, guess who the first people are going to be who bring these atrocities to light in a lot of cases? It's going to be missionaries. Missionaries, in a lot of cases, are going to start fighting for the rights of the indigenous people. They're going to fight and stand up to their own governments, all right, to gain rights and privileges, and not privileges, but just rights in general to indigenous people in colonies. So, in a lot of ways, the missionaries are going to stand up for these people when European governments start to clash down and clamp down on these people. So, anyway, the whole point of this whole slide, guys, is look, I want you to think about what missionaries did. Yes, there were some bad things that missionaries did. Like I said, there were examples in China of missionaries tearing down temples in China because they thought the religion was pagan. And yes, Europeans, missionaries, did go into these situations feeling superior. I'm not denying that. But guys, let's kind of look at multiple sides of the story. Okay? All right, pause if you need to. Okay, now I want to move into some kind of new scientific advancements that occurred in this time period because of imperialism. Well, one of the biggest sciences of imperialism was botany. Now, botany is just the study of plants. Here you see, it's called the, what's it called? The Kew Garden in London. It was a very massive display, guys, of flora from all over the world, like plants from all over the world. Okay, it's one of the most important sciences of the 19th century. So plants from all over the world were brought to Europe and analyzed. Okay, so you can imagine Europeans going into Africa, going into Asia, going into the Middle East and finding plants, and you'll see later on animals that they've never seen before. And they're going to start studying these plants. In these plants, they're going to find cures for diseases. In these plants, they're going to find like food, all manner of things they're going to find from these plants. And it led to breakthroughs for new products ranging from food to medicine, to latex, and yes, unfortunately, even rubber, as we learned in the Congo. All right, now, so there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of this, but here's some bad things, all right? So some plants are going to be indigenous to these areas, and at first, they make these nations a lot of money, but what's going to happen is Europeans are going to take seeds from these plants and plant them in Europe, and pretty soon, the demand for, indigenous plants are going to switch from the places where they originated in some cases Latin America, some cases Africa, and they're going to come to Europe. So one of the downsides is that this does affect other people's economy, all right? And it does benefit Europe's economy. All right, zoology is another big thing, guys, that is going to grow leaps and bounds in this time period. And zoology, obviously, is the study of animals. And, guys, zoos are going to be a very popular thing. They're going to spring up not only as places where you can go see animals from around the world, but also as places that study and try to understand animals. All right, so animals from around the world are discovered, they're analyzed. Yes, some of them are hunted. All right, some of them are killed, put on display, their stuffed bodies put on display. Yes, that does go on. All right, and zoos and museums display these animals, sometimes live, sometimes not alive. Here you see, guys, some kids in London about 1904, and they're riding a camel. My children, guys, went and they rode a camel when I went to Oklahoma. They have a pretty awesome zoo in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they had a camel giving rides, and my kids rode the camel. All right, but yes, guys, it's places like zoos and SeaWorld, they have a really bad reputation nowadays, all right? And rightfully so. There have been abuses that have gone on at zoos, abuses to animals, abuses to, all kinds of things, and we've seen that. But I will tell you this, the reason that we know so much of what we know about animals largely comes from these kinds of things. Does that make it right? No, but that's just the way it has been. All right, and although I will say a lot of things, a lot of the way zoos are operating now are have wide open areas and are not really zoos. They kind of let animals live in their own habitat and they drive humans through it. I don't know if that's a better thing, a worse thing, but it's whatever. It's what it is today. Pause if you need to. I'm kind of getting tongue twisted, guys, because I'm trying to tell you a balanced view, benefits and, benefits and harms to everything. So, I kind of stumbling through all this. So let's talk about one called anthropology. Now, before we talk about what I'm about ready to tell you about, anthropology is a legitimate study. All right. It's the study of humans and human cultures. And guys, the reasons that we know so much about past humans is because of anthropology. We've dug up sites. Archaeologists have dug up sites. We've studied the tools that people used. We've studied, the art that people have made. We've studied culture of the past because of anthropologists. But I will say this. Anthropologists in the 19th century are going to have an idea that's going to lead to some serious problems. And let me jump into that right now. So, anthropology at its base, guys, is the study of humans and their culture. Like I said, anthropologists go all over around the world and they study cultures of humans. All right? But scientists of the 19th century, as we already know, believe in a lot of kind of out there ideas. I told you about the belief in Aryans. I told you about social Darwinism. Well, here's another belief that modern scientists do not hold to anymore. And that belief is called polygenesis. So, the idea of polygenesis is that basically there were kind of different races of humans that have existed in the world. All right, there were races of humans in Africa. There are races of humans in China. There are races of humans in all parts of in Europe. All right, and they all evolved kind of differently. All right, some humans evolved more advanced than other humans. Does this sound like social Darwinism? Yes. All right. Like I said, scientists do not hold. I'll tell you what scientists believe nowadays. But anyway, scientists at this time period believed that there were different races of humans and they all kind of developed differently. So, if you looked at modern textbooks in the if you looked at textbooks in the 1800s, and we're going to look at them a lot, you can see, guys, that different humans evolved in different places from a different around the world. So, this helped 19th century Europeans justify their belief in racial science. Now, this false idea, guys, is going to make Europeans believe that European humans were far superior than to African humans, or Native American humans, or Asian humans. So Europeans are going to believe, like I said, they're going to look around the world, look at white Europeans, they've conquered the world, they have all this technology and all this medicine. All these other people are lesser humans that did not develop the same kind of intellect that European humans did. Now, like I said, guys, this is not what modern science says. It's what they believed in the past. All right? So, today, scientists believe the opposite. All right? Scientists believe in what's called monogenesis, which means one. The basic story goes that humans came out of Africa. All humans came out of Africa. All right? And depending on their climate, depending on the weather, how much sunshine, the environment. That's why humans developed different skin colors, different eyes, different languages, different hair, different all kinds of things, guys. Humans kind of evolved and adapted based on their climate and their regions that they lived in. That's what science says now. So science now says, look, there's no better or worse, superior or inferior humans. There's just humans. And some humans, like Europeans, had better circumstances than other humans, and that's why they developed and industrialized before everybody else. Okay? All right, now, because of false notions of polygenesis, Europeans are going to start analyzing different features of humans, including their skull size, their facial structures, the way they look. All right, guys. Here, guys, is an example of it looks like a white European dude, guys, and he's getting his head measured by a certain device to show how big his head is, you know, the sides of his nose, the sides of his forehead. I'm not kidding you guys. All of this stuff develops into Nazism. All right, Nazis, guys, are going to take these 19th century ideas and they are going to run away with it. Okay, and we'll get into that in a later chapter. All right, but anyway, in the 19th century, Europeans are learning to classify and categorize other humans, and it leads to very bad stuff. Think about it, guys. This is social Darwinism. If you, as a European, believe that you're a superior race, then when African people that you are conquering or Asian people that you're conquering, when they die, I mean, you know, that's just nature. All right, strong survive, weak die out. Do you guys see the falseness and the bad idea that it is? All right, so all of this stuff, guys, help to reinforce social Darwinism, all right? All of this kind of bad science that we no longer believe in anymore. All right? Pause if you need to. Okay, guys, so I know it's long. I know all the last 3 notes have been long, guys. I know it's the end of the quarter, and we're about ready to go to spring break, guys. But I really just, you know, I've spent so much time talking about this topic because it's a topic that most people do not understand. All right? It's a topic that maybe your mom and dad didn't learn in history, or your parent or guardian, or your grandma and grandpa, because history wasn't taught the same way back when they were in school. All right? And I take history very seriously. So I know I've spent a lot of time in this chapter, guys, but so much happened in this chapter that is going to affect groups of people like Africans and Asians up until today. So I kind of want to just finish with the legacy of imperialism. Okay? Like, what is imperialism's legacy? So I want to kind of start off with, how should we view imperialism? Okay? Now, I want to stress this. People are going to view imperialism different. All right? And I'm not going to tell you how you should view imperialism. But I'm going to tell you people are going to view it differently. If you ask somebody from Africa, any nation in Africa, how they view imperialism, they're going to tell you one thing. If you ask people from Great Britain, how do you view imperialism? They'll tell you something different. If you ask Americans, if you ask people from India, if you ask people from China, all right? And another thing is, if you ask the people that were murdered and massacred, you know, the ancestors of those people, they're going to tell you one thing. And if you ask the people that did the butchering and that did the conquering, they're going to tell you something different. So, like everything, guys, imperialism has a complicated legacy, all right? We've talked about so many things in history that if you really look at them, they're complicated, all right? People are complicated sometimes, all right? Events are complicated. So imperialism has a complicated legacy, and how we view it is going to be complicated. So let me kind of explain. If you ask Westerners, Europeans, what they think of imperialism, they might say, well, you know what? Modern ideas were spread around the world. Modern science, modern medicine. And some of these things that were spread around the world had positive effects. All right? Okay? So they might view imperialism like this picture right here. White European missionaries going to Africa and Asia and all over the world and spreading good things. Okay? All right, so like I said, who are you asking about the legacy of imperialism? All right, Europeans and Westerners might say, well, you know, some good things happened, okay? But like I said, guys, ask other people, And you ask some Europeans, guys, obviously if you ask historians, they're going to tell you, well, what about the wars? What about the massacres? What about the genocide? What about the Congo? What about German Southwest Africa? Guys, you name any place that imperialism touched, and there was butchery and there was genocide. All right? So, on the other hand, you could look at imperialism like this. Great Britain and white Europeans were these big monsters going around the world and gobbling up nations. All right? Or you could view it like this. Same kind of concept. Otto von Bismarck on the left from Germany grabbing up colonies and putting them in his bag. British guy John Bull grabbing up colonies and putting them in his bag. The Russian Tsar on the right grabbing up stuff and putting it in their bag. That is an accurate way to look at it. Okay? Like I said, all the wars, all the massacres, all the genocides, that was part of imperialism too. One thing I can tell you guys is that the good thing, guys, is we live in a time where history in this country can be accurately portrayed. And I think I've told you this before, but if you look at history books in the 1950s and earlier, history books, guys, would be what we would definitely consider today kind of racist. They were only told, all right, well, let me put it this way, accepted history books that you would learn from in a classroom, all right, only told history from the perspective of like white men, all right? They mentioned women and they mentioned like minorities and they mentioned, slavery, or they mentioned, Native Americans, but they did it in a very, definitely in a racist way at times, in a sexist way for women at times, and you didn't get an accurate portrayal of history. But in the 1960s, guys, when the civil rights movement happened in the United States and in other places around the world, all right, we had this awakening where we started to listen to the voices of African people, of Native American people, of Asian people. We started to accept their perspectives of what happened in history. All right, guys? So what I'm saying is, guys, in the 1950s, you wouldn't have learned about the Belgian Congo. You would have learned the other version where Europeans went and missionaries went in and they did all these great things in your history class, right? And then in the 60s, you would have learned, well, wait a second. Did anybody ever ask what people in the Congo thought of imperialism? Did anybody ever ask what Native Americans thought of Columbus? Now, here's the deal. They'd been asking those questions, guys. There are African-American historians like W.E.B. Du Bois, all right, who had written history from the perspective of African Americans, but it wouldn't have been history that you would have learned in the average classroom. Okay? So I'm saying, guys, since the 1960s, we have better perspectives on history and we have a more accurate view on history so that now we know all of these things. And I'm saying, guys, we live in a good time, all right, because we have a more accurate history than we've ever had. Okay? And guys, we have largely learned from our past mistakes. All right? Okay? I've told you this before, guys. In our country, I know things seem bad, mostly because of COVID-19. I know things seem bad because the only thing that you ever see on TV is, struggles of race relations and things like this and women's rights, guys. But I'll tell you right now, all right, look at history. We are better off than we've ever been. All right? More people in the world, especially in our country, have rights than they've ever had. All right? Now, that does not mean we should stop and say, well, all right, we've done it. We're equal. Because we're not, guys. We're not equal. All right? We're getting there. We're getting closer. All right? But like I said, guys, we are more equal now than we've ever been. How about that? All right? How about we say that? But like I said, guys, that in no way means that we are fully equal, that everybody's treated equally. All right? And that does not mean that we still do not have a lot of work to go. So, how do you view imperialism, guys? Complicated. All right? You acknowledge that, okay, sure, maybe Europeans brought medicine and modern ideas. But you also say, on the other hand, Europeans in some instances murdered, massacred, and killed women, men, and children in these countries. All right? So, anyway, guys, I guess I'll just leave you with that. And I will see you the next time. That's the end of chapter 17.